I was 13 years old, I was living in this beautiful middle of nowhere place called Maple Lake, BC. For those of you that don't know my story, my parents were divorced young. When I was young, they were young too. I had a stepmom who had overdosed on pills and lost her life that way. And so already by 13 years old, my life was pretty much in turmoil. I had already seen a lot, experienced a lot as a 13-year-old. And so maybe it's not surprising that one night when I was at a neighboring farm with a friend and my sister, my friend dared me to drink a 26er of scotch. He had gone into the people's liquor cabinet and went, "Hey, you should drink this." And I never had much experience with alcohol. You know, like maybe my grandparents, maybe my parents would say, "Here's a sip of beer, here's a sip of wine," or whatever. But my friend was like, "I dare you, like, drink this," you know, it's a good Canadian term, a 26er. It's, I don't know, anyway. And I was like, "Fine." And I took that 26er of whatever whiskey it was, I can't remember, and I guzzled it like it was a can of Pepsi. Well, I remember sometime later, maybe a lot later, whether it was high school biology or university biology, learning about this little thing called alcohol poisoning and recognizing how lucky I was in that moment that I didn't die. You know, I was like 115 pounds soaking wet and just literally guzzled that 26er of whiskey down. Now, there were times during that night, as you can imagine, I kind of wish I had died, because I made my way down from the neighboring farm to this knoll above our house, and that's as far as I got. And I lay there all through the night because I couldn't move, I didn't want to move, and emptied my stomach of everything and more. Well, some of you can imagine what I felt like that next morning when I got off of that uncomfortable place and made my way down to the farm, to our farm. Now, the reason I bring up that little story is because I want to introduce the scope of what we're talking about this morning. It's a series I've been thinking about literally for months now, and we've called it, as a staff, as we kind of interacted around some ideas, we've called it pain management. Because here's the deal, right? We all have pain. Wouldn't it be nice, you know, that we could kind of point out two people, you know, in the audience today and say, "Okay, you get pain. The rest of us have a free pass." The reality is, the tragic reality is pain, it seems, is just a part of the human experience. What do you do with your pain? What do you do with your pain? And I'm thinking this morning, not so much of chronic physical pain, although certainly that applies, but I'm thinking specifically about emotional pain, mental pain, psychological pain, and what we do to try and manage that pain. And this whole idea of managing pain has become very significant to me, especially in light of words from this amazing speaker by the name of Danielle Strickland. Danielle Strickland says this, and this just stopped me cold. See what you think about this. She says, all addiction is pain management. All addiction is pain management. And as I've thought about that over the past couple of months, as I've ran that across people that are in recovery, friends in recovery, people who work in recovery, across the board, everybody thinks about it for a moment and they go, "That is true." There is just something so right about that statement. And here's the thing, I think you can reverse engineer it too, to say all addiction is pain management. But if we all have pain, if pain is a part of our experience, so often the way that you and I manage our pain, it actually leads us into forms of addiction. Now let me just say, you may be going, "Well, who cares what Danielle Strickland says? You know, why should I listen to Danielle Strickland?" Well, you should listen to Danielle Strickland because she's been there. Like, tragically, her story is that in her early teens, she was addicted to hard substances, hard narcotics, hard drugs. She was incarcerated through most of her teens. And you can look up her story. It's just an incredibly inspiring story from what she experienced at such a young age to go on and really speak around the world. Like, she's recognized globally as this amazing speaker, but I think more significantly, she leads a global charge to help people who have been marginalized and find themselves marginalized to experience freedom, to be released from whatever kind of prison, whatever kind of circumstances that they experience, to find freedom. And that's her passion, and she's making a dent in this world. And so this morning, as we think about this idea that's really overarching this whole series we're looking at, all addiction is pain management, I want to say to you that on one hand, this series, it is for what AA, you know, the big book of AA, if you've heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's what AA calls the real addict. You know, like the alcoholic, the drug addict, the gambling addict, the sexual addiction person, you name it, you fill in the blank, it is for the real addict. And AA gives a description, in a sense, of a real addict. It's their term, it's not mine. I'm not trying to be derogatory, but they identify a real addict. And you can look up here and say a real addict, or see a real addict at some stage of their addiction career, they begin to lose all control of their consumption once they start. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by their addiction. And then next slide tells us this: the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. And then it says this, that they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. In other words, other people are doing it. Other people can have a drink. Why can't I have a drink? And so this series, to be clear, is for what AA calls the real addict, with the hope that there's freedom in addiction. There is freedom to experience a radically different life than addiction. And so as we spend these 8 weeks in these series, a series of 4, and then Thanksgiving, and then another series of 4, and then a final episode, if you will, on how do we support people with addictions in our life. But that this series is going to be for what AA calls the real addict, with the confidence that there is hope in the midst of addiction. But hold on to your seats, okay? Because maybe some of us are going, I'm not a real addict. That's not who I am. That doesn't apply to me. Yeah, just think about the principle of what Danielle Strickland states. All addiction is pain management. Maybe I should be whispering this to you in Starbucks, like one-on-one. All of us experience addictions at certain times and in certain ways. All of us have addictions at certain times and experience addictions in certain ways. Or let me say it like this: just because something is socially acceptable, it can still be an addiction. Just because it's socially acceptable. And let me be specific about that. Like, what is socially acceptable addiction? Well, I was reading an article recently, and the title of the article was this. It said, you don't drink, but do you fill in the blank, right? Do you do this? And it gave this list, just kind of move out of the way. What are socially acceptable addictions? And just look at the list. Like food. You might think, food, you got to eat. Like, how can food? It's not food. It's the 10th Twinkie. Okay, it's like trans fat in a plastic wrapper. I don't know, but it's not food to live. It's that when I experience this level of pain in my life, what do I turn to? There's this, and for some of us, what soothes us, what comforts us, what we use to manage the pain in our life is actually we turn to food. What about the next one? Like, this is a tough one, right, in North America, because work, we get such affirmation for work. Like, our boss is like, atta boy, atta girl, like, working hard. We really respect that, and yet we have a term for this, right? Say, well, someone that works too much is what? A workaholic, right? It's got the oholic built right into it. It's like work can be an addiction because it's not just like one-offs, like when I got to work hard. It's like work consumes my life because, and let me be very specific, there's nothing wrong against working hard. There's nothing wrong with eating. You die without it, but it's when we lose ourselves, when our work or our food becomes our means of managing our pain. And then, there is the shopaholic, right? And it's like, come on, back to school. Like, I need new shoes. I need new clothes. It's like, yeah, we all get that. I didn't know about the closet full of shoes, but we all get the fact that we need clothes. But there is that experience for some people of going, like, I feel this way. There's this hurt. There's this pain. There's this angst. There's this restlessness. There's something going on inside of me. And somehow when I get on Amazon.com, it's kind of like, or CA, it's kind of like, that feels good. Like that new thing is being sent to me and I was able to buy it and I feel better about myselk until you get your statement at the end of the month, obviously, right? And then there's this other thing, and I have to think about this one. What do you think about gossip? Like, how could gossip be an addiction? But frankly, what are we doing when we gossip about somebody often? Aren't we trying to feel better about ourselves? It's like, yeah, I know, like, my life's this way, and I've got this pain in my life, and I'm not everything that I think that I should be, but somehow when I say something about that person, I feel a little bit better about myself. And so actually gossip can become this addiction in our lives because when we're feeling our pain, somehow we can feel better when we talk about whatever or whoever it is. And then the last thing is what? I'm not going to pick on wine. Drink. It's like, no, you're not an alcoholic. No, I'm not an alcoholic, but there's like that third glass of wine. It's like, pick up the 6-pack for the week of, craft beer from Fieldhouse, and they're not paying me anything for that, but no, that's for tonight. That's not for the week. And it's the connection between, there's this pain in my soul. And the way that I attempt to manage the pain in my soul is I turn to this thing that kind of numbs the pain. And you might say to me this morning, well, thanks a lot, Mr. Judgy Pants. Quit pointing the finger at me. Like, who do you think you are? You Puritan you? Maybe that's playing that tape in the back of your head. But it is a big deal, friends. It's a big deal. And we talked about this, if you remember, in the Uprising series, if you were here for that. This idea that if you and I don't deal and face and name the pain in our lives, if we don't have any ability to address that pain or any desire even to address that pain, if we're just trying to numb the pain, if we don't take care of the pain owns us in our lives. And when pain owns us in our lives, when we don't confront, when we don't deal, when we just try to numb the pain in our lives, what so often can take place, what so often can happen, is that pain is something we try to manage in a lot of unhealthy and a lot of often destructive ways. And so, taking that work home, working through the lunch hour, not as a one-off, but regularly, having that, 6 bottle of beer that night, spending on that whatever piece of clothing that actually, oops, I already got one in my closet, having that 10th Twinkie of the week. Do they even make Twinkies anymore? But that thing that you go to, they shouldn't, should they? But how would you make a healthy Twinkie anyway? Maybe we call it energy bars, I don't know. But it's reaching for that thing to try and manage our pain instead of facing the pain. And friends, let's be clear. This is true for the real addict, as AA says, but it's true for all of us. And the question I want us to address in this series, and the question that is going to lead us to hopefulness and to find freedom in the midst of addiction, the question is this: how do we do that? How do we find freedom? Where is the freedom that we can experience in the midst of this addiction that can wrap its tentacles around our life and prevent us from experiencing a good life, and frankly, sometimes in the extreme, destroying everything that we love and everything that we hope for? And this is where we come to this absolutely phenomenal thing that you may be aware of, called the Recovery Program, or the 12-Step Program. I mean, we're 80 years into this program of the 12 steps of recovery, of Alcoholics Anonymous. It sort of developed during the 30s, and we're maybe not so impacted by the significance of it anymore. But if you look in the second edition of the big book of AA, these are the stats already in 1955 that are coming out of this experience of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried. In other words, they immersed themselves in the program. 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses. And among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA, in other words, continued in the program, in the steps, showed improvement. Now you may go, well, yeah, big deal, like who cares? What's really interesting is if you kind of look at an overview of addiction kind of through the centuries. Before AA, there was this phrase, and we use it today, but it was kind of meant differently back then. The phrase is this: once an addict, always an addict. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And back in that day, what that meant is that if you were an addict, a certain kind of addict, there was no hope for you. Psychiatrists, the medical community, therapists, there is no hope if you are an addict of recovery. And then there was AA. And then there was this recovery movement that has given us these kinds of amazing statistics that provide a pathway and hope for so many individuals. So consider with me this morning the first step, and we are going to look at 8 principles of AA, if you will. There's 12 steps. Some of them are duplicated, and so over the next weeks we're going to look at these 8 steps and how they can lead to freedom for all of us, real addicts and those of us that wrestle with more socially acceptable addictions. But step 1 goes like this, and let me just insert here, okay, that like with any journey, you need to take the steps. Like with any journey, you need to take step 1 and step 2 and step 3. You don't want to rush the steps. You don't want to jump over the steps. You do that on any journey, and the chances are that you can experience falling off the trail, injuring yourself, and not making it to your destination. There's something very profound about taking each of these steps and taking these steps in order. But the first step of AA, if you're not familiar with the 12-step program, it says this: we admitted we were powerless over fill in the blank. We admitted we were powerless over, you fill in the blank, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, can you think with me just for a moment, almost like just, okay, first impression, how crazy that sounds? It's like the hope is this, that you can actually gain traction over your addiction, that you can overcome your addiction, that your addiction will lose control. And what does AA say? What does the recovery program say? The 12 steps, it starts like this: admit you're powerless. Admit that you don't have the ability to manage this addiction that has its tentacles in your life. And I think most of us read that and we go, what? I mean, let's be brutally honest here, because frankly, that's what step one calls us to be, right? It calls us to be brutally honest with our lives. And to be brutally honest about step one is to admit this. This is basically impossible, right? As we say, this is almost well nigh impossible. Because why? Because you and I are hardwired for what? We're hardwired for control, aren't we? I mean, come on, you got a problem? Fix your problem. Deal with your problem. Find a solution. I mean, you deal with the pain of your life. I deal with the pain of my life. How? I deal with it in the way that I think I can manage my pain, right? It's my preferred way of dealing with, of managing my pain. Because if I have a problem, what do? If I've got a problem, I got to find a fix. I've got to find a way to take care of my problem. And this is where some of us say, yeah, this is where I eat. This is where I drink. This is where I spend. Yeah, I know it's not the best, but it kind of numbs the pain. And somehow it gives me the ability to just make it through. And what I'm talking about here, I think, is illustrated well in this amazing friend that I have by the name of Dave. I met Dave when we lived in Vancouver, and like a lot of people, Dave was sent up, as a CEO for like a year in Vancouver to do whatever, and then went back home. But I spent this year with Dave. I love Dave, like just such a close, amazing friend. And Dave was like this highly successful, like almost mind-blowingly successful CEO. Like he had this company and he had this wealth that was like off the charts. But Dave was an alcoholic. And just think about that for a moment, like hugely successful CEO, alcoholic. Dave didn't think he had a problem in his life. He thought he could do it all. He didn't think his life was a mess. He didn't think his life was a disaster. He was like, I can handle this. Until one day, when Dave was in about his 40s, and he drove home, got out of the car, walked up the sidewalk, and there was his wife, Judy, waiting at the door. And she said, Dave, if you take one more drink, I am out of here. This marriage is over. This family is over. I am taking the kids. And we're gone. And for some reason, on that day, Dave understood that he stood at the verge of losing everything. And Dave faced his addiction. And Dave told me that for the next 365 days consecutively, he attended a recovery AA meeting, sometimes twice a day. And committing himself to that program, 15 years later when I met Dave, he was still clean and sober. And he was investing back into the lives, as the 12 steps will show us, back into the lives of other alcoholics, with really this great news of how an alcoholic can gain traction, can gain freedom over his addiction. And I am so grateful that I have so many friends who have had the same kind of experience like Dave, and I hope you have had that kind of experience as well. But let me ask the question, when did things change? When did they find freedom over their addiction? The day they stopped making excuses. The day they stopped shoveling the blame onto others. That my addiction is because of you. It's because of that person. It's because of that circumstance. It's because of whatever happened over here. I'm the way I am because of what you have done to me. The day Dave and so many others gain some kind of ability to face this thing that is uncontrollable in their lives is the day that they're able to be brutally honest and to call whatever it is for what it is. This thing that is out of control, because you cannot control something that is out of control. And you know, if you've ever been to an AA meeting, any kind of recovery meeting, that, or if you've seen it on television, that it begins like this. My name is Adam, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I'm a gambling addict. I'm a sex addict. You fill in the blank. And I know some people don't like that because they go, well, my identity isn't wrapped up with my addiction. I understand, but there is something so important in breaking the hold of addiction and keeping that freedom over addiction, to remember the hold that that addiction had for you and your inability to manage this thing in your life. It's essential to be set free. Now maybe, see the scorecards, you're thinking to yourself, good lecture on the 12 steps. Good lecture on recovery. Thanks for that. You're welcome. But the point this morning I'm making is tied to this fact that not everyone is aware of. But what many people understand is that the 12 steps in the recovery movement was originally rooted in and based in the person and the words of Jesus. Specifically, Jesus' words from the letter of Matthew, one of these biographies about Jesus that we find in the New Testament, and specifically what we call the Beatitudes, these words that reflect what is a happy life, what is a good life, what is a blessed life. And you can read about, you can do the research and see how one of the co-founders of AA went to a recovery appointment, if you will, because of his desperation, traveled all the way from the eastern seaboard of the States to Europe to meet with this renowned doctor. You probably know his name, Dr. Carl Jung. And Dr. Carl Jung looked at his case and his situation and his addiction, and he went, you are the type of addict for whom there is no hope. But he said there is this group, and I've started to see some change happening, some recovery taking place for these addicts that we have always thought were hopeless. And this group is called the Oxford Group. And their recovery was based in the hope and the person and the truth of Jesus. And this founder of AA, co-founder of AA, experienced that hopefulness and that recovery based on these spiritual principles. See, the point is this, like you can look up here and you can see that this first step that we talk about is that we admitted we were powerless over. What is that thing in your life that has its hold on you, that you're trying to manage your pain through? But this first step is actually based on the words of Jesus. Where Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, in these Beatitudes, blessed are, literal translation, happy are, notice this phrase, the poor in spirit. It's kind of, what? It's almost like saying, you know what? You know how you get victory over addiction? You admit you're powerless. It's kind of like Jesus says, blessed are, happy are, what? Rich people? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And the first thing up here that should really draw our attention is the fact that Jesus talks about the reality of this alternate kind of life, a life that is described as being happy or blessed, that there is this experience of life that you can have. And don't let this phrase, the kingdom of heaven, throw you. Because it's not referring to kind of, oh yeah, you struggle through this life, there's all kinds of pain, but there's this castle on this cloud, and I go there after I die. that's like the furthest thing that Jesus is talking about here. What he's saying is that there is this life that you and I can experience, that we can enter into, that is the blessed and happy life, where in life you experience the presence and the reality of God, the kingdom of heaven breaking into your experience because God is present. And you experience the strength and the comfort and the reality of your heavenly Father in the midst of your pain, to give you the strength and the ability to face your pain. And then Jesus talks about this condition. You see that? He describes it as poor in spirit. And who of us is just like, hey, give me some of that? Like, I sign up for poor in spirit. Like, how in the world does poor in spirit enable me to have any sort of freedom from my addiction? The last thing we want to have anything to do with is poverty. One of my favorite writers by the name of Dallas Willard, he said this. He said, pain here, let me read this, the quote for you. He says, real poverty in the human order is almost automatically taken as a sign of failure in every respect. It's true, isn't it? Like, this calls on poverty of spirit. We don't even want to ask the question, where do I get a hold of some of that? But would you think with me about the experience of my friend Dave as you think about your own experience? Because Dave was this alcoholic. And there was that day, there was that experience in Dave's life when he came home. And in coming home, there was Judy at the door that said, Dave, enough. And what is it that happened in that experience, in that moment for Dave, that somehow he was able to recognize that his thinking, his behavior, his commitment, that he was going to somehow manage the pain of his life, he was going to somehow control the pain of his life, was an absolute illusion. See, the brutal, the harsh truth is this, is that you and I were never created. You and I were never given the capacity to control the universe. We're not able to be God of this universe, nor are we able to be God of our own lives. And until we recognize that, addiction takes us in all kinds of crazy ways because we don't have the capacity to handle this pain in our lives. So let me ask you this morning, what's your thing? What's your thing? I point the finger at myself. What's my thing? Now, some of you this morning, and let's make room for this, you may be going, the expression that I'm making as I'm listening to this is an expression of gratitude because it has been the very pain of my life that has driven me to a heavenly Father who offers me this comfort and this strength and this meaning and this life. But for others of us, there is this ongoing reality, whether in the expression of a real addict or in a socially acceptable addict, that continues to try to manage pain in our lives that is so far and so different from this blessed and happy life that Jesus longs for us to experience. And so what I want to invite you into this week, of all of us to lean into, is this first step of AA, where we admitted we were powerless over, you fill in the blank. What is it for you? And maybe this morning some of you are going like, there's this red blinking light on my dashboard. It's like, duh, I know what it is. For others of us, maybe it is more subtle. But I would encourage you, take time this week and identify what that thing or those things are. And then continue to join us as we take these steps together and find that freedom, that blessed and happy life that Jesus is inviting us into. Let me pray with us. Heavenly Father, this is so hard. It's so easy in many ways to try and push down that stuff that keeps coming up in our life. Trying to manage it, trying to take care of it, trying to hope that nobody notices, while we continue to stand on the verge of losing everything. Would you give us the courage and the ability this morning to see ourselves as we are, and to call out that way that we continue to try and manage the pain in our lives. And give us the hope to take these steps together as the way to effectively manage the pain and experience the blessed, happy life that you have created us for. I ask this in Jesus' name.